play does in fact predict patterns of later dominance. So if I win in this friendly play interaction with you when we're pups, I'm more likely to be socially dominant to you when we're yearlings. And other things come into play as we mature, but typically there's this strong correlation between relative rank based on play and relative rank later in life. Okay? So that was really exciting, and this is true both for males and females, and most of this is happening with genetic relatives. Okay. So back to the other question, thinking about Hamilton's rule. So genetic relatives are playing with each other, they're doing these friendly behaviors. What about, are they fighting with each other? And it turns out, yes. Just as with the hyenas, here's the relationship between genetic relatedness and agonism or fighting, and you can see that they're highly correlated as well. So yes, it's we're being helpful and being friendly to genetic relatives, but it's failing to protect us from aggression. Okay? So I say surprisingly, but similar pattern to what we saw in the hyenas. So I started to look for this in a little more detail, just to give this update after 50 years thinking about Hamilton. And it turns out that, oh yeah, and here's with the hyenas again. So these coalitionary attacks are going down the dominance hierarchy, and because genetic relatives are typically below you, we're hammering them as well in these dominance hierarchies. Okay, turns out this is actually pretty common across mammals. So when you start pouring through the literature, Japanese macaques, ringtail lemurs, bonnet macaques, based on various levels of relatedness, they're actually sometimes higher fighting rates of fighting within family groups than directed towards non-relatives. And you can imagine that your closest relatives are often your closest competitors because you're sharing the same resources, you have similar interests and things like that. So we see when we quantify these rates of behavior, higher or indistinguishable rates of who's receiving the aggression based on genetic relatedness. So that's true here. It's also true in a variety of carnivores, including raccoons that we see around here, badgers, coyotes, or coatis, and meerkats as well. So this is actually really prolific, and I could go on, but these are some examples. So in general, kinship is failing to protect animals from being aggressed upon, receiving aggression. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking about these days, and this is just the quick little segue into thinking about local research on another mammal, so California ground squirrels out here in the East Bay, and we mark these same animals the same way that we did with the marmots. And basically this summer we started up a new field project, and we're starting to ask similar kinds of questions as I've been asking these other animals. Here are some of my students, and we're going out and we're trapping these squirrels. I have a squirrel in here, it's kind of like little sleeping bags, they're nice and calm, and then we can use cattle dye to mark them. And here's ghosts that we've marked. So we're going out and we're marking these individuals. We have about 100 animals that we've marked, and we've also been recording all of their social interactions, so in the same way that we've been doing with these other animals, and we're recording this over time with the ultimate goal of asking about the social relationships of these squirrels. Okay? And the squirrels have a variety of different behaviors. They do affiliative behaviors, which are typically, again, helpful to the recipient. And they also engage in agonistic behaviors. They probably don't look quite like this, but this is a fun slide anyway. So various levels of aggression that are harmful to recipients. And basically, in the long run, we'll be asking, do genetic relationships also predict patterns of behavior in these animals? What do these behaviors look like? Well, they can sit in body proximity. That's a friendly behavior. They can also sit proximity where they're not quite in body contact, but they're sitting fairly close to each other. They're coming up, they're initiating that, they're leaving. So space use is important in these animals because they're colonial and they have a burrow that everyone shares and goes into. And they do some nose-to-cheek behavior where the nose of one squirrel goes near the mouth of another squirrel. And this is similar to a greeting behavior, but they also are engaged in greetings, which are direct rubbing of the noses, so we separate those out as well. And direct So one initiator touches the nose of another squirrel. And what else do they do? Well, they fight. So we record fighting, and this usually happens really, really quickly, so it's hard to get a good photo of these. This is one of my favorites. This is a slap. I actually didn't take this photo, but it's pretty cool. It's, slapping behaviors. So that would be a fairly low-level threat, but they could also bite each other with their incisors, and you can imagine that could be a high level of threat. So we record these multiple levels of threat. They also chase each other, and that's an aggressive kind of behavior. Okay, so from this summer, these are fairly preliminary data. I just started at Mills 1 year ago, and we just had our first field season, so marking 100 squirrels is great, and what are they doing? Well, overall, they're typically involved in affiliative behaviors more often than aggressive behaviors. So being in proximity, playing with each other, greeting and sniffing each other, these behaviors happen more often than do other behaviors. We still need to relate this to hourly rates, but in general, it seems like these are happening more often than our agonistic behaviors. And that's interesting, but our next step is to connect this with genetics. So the next goal, we've collected a bunch of fur from these squirrels. Hopefully we can get the DNA out of it. We're still working on that. We might have to go to tissue or something like that. We'll be analyzing the DNA and again, hopefully establishing these pedigrees. Okay, and just to sum up, so that's sort of what I'm doing in the research now locally, types of questions we've asked broadly in the past, what others have found with respect to aggression and cooperation. And what I would say, thinking about past 50 years, it's kind of a big topic, and we didn't get to all of the different things, is that we made a lot of progress, okay? And I would suggest that these long-term studies based on natural variation are really, really important. So I'm hoping to study these squirrels for 30 years. The hyena project's been going for 25 years. The marmot project for 50 years. These long-term data sets with marked individuals with known pedigrees are really, really important. It's hard to quantify these fitness consequences, and this is one way to get at it. So I think that it's really important to be able to use these long-term data sets to connect it to evolutionary theory. Given that, even some of the really best studied mammals, we don't have a full picture yet. So there's still some unresolved questions, and so there's more work to be done. It's really hard to still estimate the precise cost of a hyena going in and forming a coalition in that moment. We can start to summarize this over an individual's lifetime if we track them for that long, but being able to quantify those costs and benefits is still a little bit challenging. And you've seen I've been working on pretty different kinds of animals, and so I really think there's a lot of value in this comparative approach. So what I'd like to do eventually is have a whole phylogeny where we're actually looking at the tendency to cooperate or to fight with each other based on genetic relatedness and populate a whole phylogeny. So with that, I see there are students coming in there. I'd like to thank my students for all of their help. Many people going into this project being helpful along the way. And I will put this up if there's time for questions.
Yeah, we have 4 minutes.
4 minutes, excellent, good. And I found a parking spot. Excellent, so thanks for listening, and if you have to go on to your next class, by all means, but if not, I'll stick around for some questions.